This video we're just gonna talk a little bit about casting parts on the deer. Just a couple parts. Like I'm gonna cast a septum on the deer. When I skin one of my deer out, I just carefully skin it around so that I have the whole detail of the septum. We'll put these in there. That gives you a little more realistic look, and it'll save you from buying septums and putting them in. I also cut out the scutiform cartilage in the ears. That's when you feel your ears, you kind of feel that cartilage in there. That's that piece there. And if you look at our reference photos, it's that muscle that sits right there. So if you have these casts, you can kind of line your ear up and then line it where it needs to sit down into there. I mean, these aren't necessary to cast because you can sculpt these with clay and you'd be fine that way too, but I'm going to go ahead and cast them. I'm just going to take a little bit of bedding fiber and I'm going to put it down here in the bottom. Just give me something to bed into. You can also bed them in clay if you wanted to. Anything, we're just going to have to kind of make them so that they stand up. So you just need something to kind of bed in. Okay. Once we kind of get that level there on the bottom, we're just going to carefully take our septum and stand it straight up in there. And we're going to put our cartilages, stand them up in there as well. Okay. Once we have these in here like this, we're going to actually stick these in the freezer, make sure everything's frozen and stays in place so we don't have to worry about them shifting as we cast. So they'll freeze down into that. They'll freeze down into that bedding here, and once we pull them out, we'll be ready to cast. It'll probably stay in the freezer for probably an hour, and that should be enough. I mean, you can leave it in longer, but an hour should be sufficient. Now I have all our parts. They're frozen in there, and they're kind of where we want them. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of lacquer thinner. We're going to spray over our parts. That'll take care of any frost that you might have gotten on them. Okay. Now we're ready to mix our silicone up, and we'll just pour the silicone right into there. Okay, at this point we're going to have to weigh out our silicone. And our hardener. Now our silicone, it's about a 10-to-1. The silicone to hardener. I'm not going to need a whole lot, so I'm just going to kind of approximate what I need there. That looks like it should probably be plenty. I probably got too much, but you can see we'll just clear that off. Remember how much we have to put in, 10% of that, and we'll go ahead and and we're just going to take a drill and blend this all. We'll take our drill and then we'll blend this all up. Okay. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put this in a vacuum container, and this will allow us to get the air bubbles out. And we'll kind of watch it rise, and then it's gonna fall down onto itself, and then we'll just kind of wait until that happens. But then we'll work most of these air bubbles out. Okay. That'll pretty much get rid of all the air bubbles. I mean, you still see a couple surface air bubbles in there, but it gets rid of most of the micro bubbles that were inside of the silicone, and we'll pour it slowly so we'll work any other air bubbles out of it. Then we just want to kind of pour it fairly high. We just want to pour a slow stream onto it. More. I thought I had enough, but I didn't have quite enough silicone, so I'll mix a little bit more up, and then we'll finish this mold up. Okay, at this point our silicone is set up and pretty hard. We just got to demold it now. We'll just work the edges free, and we'll actually just end up cutting along the side here. We're just going to take a pair of scissors and cut it apart here. We'll scrape most of that off. We're going to go ahead, we're going to take this to the sink and wash the rest of it off. We just don't want to pull our parts out and then get our bedding material down in our cavity here. Okay, now we got this out, we're just going to go in here and pull our cast parts out. Kind of work in there a little bit. We don't want to, you want to be careful not to tear it too much, but at this point we should have our mold. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take a hair dryer and I'm just going to make sure everything's dry, because when we put our casting material in there, if it's still a little wet, it'll react with it and it'll give us a little bit of bubbles, and won't give us as nice of a cast as we should have. Now for the mold I'm going to use to make our part, I'm going to use a smooth cast 327. This particular liquid plastic, it kind of dries with a clearer tone, so it's not the kind that when it sets it turns white, so it's a little easier to color, but this is what I'm going to be using for this one. And it's just a 50-50 mix as far as volume, and I think it's a little bit different on the weight. But I usually just kind of eyeball it up and get them pretty close to 50-50. I got it mixed in there about 50-50. I'm getting towards the end of my can, so I might have a little issue with that setting up. What we're going to use, we're going to tint these. We're going to use the So Strong. I have the flesh. Yeah, I have the flesh color and then I have the red color. If you use these, especially the red's a very strong red, so you need very, very little of that. The flesh isn't quite as strong, but we're going to use these two to mix into that. I'll just put a couple of drops of the flesh in there. And kind of get you a pretty fleshy color. And then I'm just going to take one little drop of this and put it on a cup. I'm just going to tap that into it, and you'll see how much that changes the color, just that wee little bit. And that should get me a pretty close to where I want it. I might want a little heavy on the flesh, but we'll go ahead and pour this into our mold. We can kind of work our mold, pull it apart a little bit, and that should work most any air bubbles out. And as you can see, as my fingers, I accidentally touched that red So Strong. If you do that, you're going to have your fingers dyed, so try to avoid that if at all possible. Okay. Okay, at this point, my plastic's hard. I actually ended up on this one I ended up using Smooth Cast 300. What I poured in here, it was the end of my bottle, so it wasn't right, so it ended up not setting up. So I went ahead and just used that, and it should still give me a pretty decent mold. It just might not be as translucent as the 320-25 series would be. But we're just going to kind of take our mold and spread it out and kind of pull our mold away from our plastic pieces. And we're just going to work them out, and there we have one of our scutiform cartilages there. Pull loose. No, those aren't going to really matter the color that we have. Pull this one here out, and also the 300 series plastic, it dries white, so it's a little bit harder to get our colors to match, where the other one, because it dries clear, the color that we pour into it is pretty much the color it dries. But as you can see, there's our septum. A little bit of translucency through there. If we shine a light through there, you can kind of see it there. So it still shines through. And if I get a little closer here, and you can see all the detail that we picked up on that septum. So we could put this in a deer. And then we'd be ready to go. What I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to actually cast a few different ones of these. I'll cast probably 4 or 5 of them, then I'll make kind of like a production mold where I can pour 4 or 5 at the same time. I'll trim this up a little bit so that it's already the shape that I want for my deer. Yeah, I'll trim this up. I'll probably just take like a Dremel, and I'll take some of the edges that I didn't have cleaned up real well on my meat. But I'll make a production mold of them, probably 4 or 5 of them, and that'll just allow me to pour more at a time instead of where I'm doing it this way with this mold. It'd be 1 at a time. So I'll get probably 4 pulled out of this mold and make a production mold, and there's kind of our parts. And they're just nice to have these parts on hand. We can use the cast cartilage here as we set our ears on the manikin. We can kind of use the part. I mean, it's not necessary to have this cartilage cast, but it is kind of handy on sometimes. But that's pretty much a good start on how to cast some of these materials.